Now we're going to talk about value. We have been working with contour line, ellipses, but we've not talked about light. Without light, we really can't see anything. So today we're going to talk about first our value scale. The human eye can see many values between light and dark, but we usually start with a 10 or 9 or 12 unit value scale. And here I've started with my darkest dark, and I want to gradate that scale all the way up to white. If I look at the sphere I've drawn, it's a gray sphere, so it does not start out white. The table's white, and our only actual white will be where the light that's shining from an angle is directly reflecting onto that sphere. And we call this our highlight. Our second area on our value scale is light. In our light area, on our gray sphere, is just a little bit darker than our highlight. But it is not white, so we call that light. Then we have shadow. As the light goes around the sphere is, the edge of the sphere is moving away from the light, thus becoming darker. And we'll have an area we call shadow. And that will come from our mid-range on our value scale. We also should have core shadow, which should be our darkest part of our shadow, and that usually appears in the middle of our shadow area, and we call this core shadow. Now we'll see some reflection here. The white of the table is actually reflecting into the sphere, and we see the curvature being caused by the shape of the sphere, and we see this lighter area, which is actually the white tablecloth reflecting into the sphere. We call this reflected light. We always have our cast shadow. Whatever object is having light shone upon it will cast a shadow behind it. And we'll also have a little area that we call reflected shadow. The shadow is actually, if you have a shiny surface like this sphere is, a little bit of reflected shadow. When I examine my cast shadow, I notice that the shadow is darkest where it meets the sphere. The edge of the shadow is sharpest where it meets the sphere. And as the cast shadow travels further away from the object, the edge of that shadow is going to be softer, lighter, and faded depending on your light source. In this room we have multiple light sources, but at home when you're working on this you should have one light source at an angle diagonally shining on the object, so we have good balance of light and dark. I have not drawn this in yet, but if we look at our sphere, in this setting we have a dark draped background, and this is a good example of where we can have lost line or disappearing line, because the shadow on my sphere is almost the same value as that cloth behind it. So instead of having a broad, thick outline, we actually can have a lost line when the values are similar. And I could continue that on. The same thing could happen if this was a white sphere, and the white sphere and the white, if there was a white background, were causing a lost edge. With our value scale, there's numbers of ways that we can describe value, not always with just a solid surface. I can introduce cross-hatching. That's a way of creating value without a continuous tone, but rather hatching your line and cross over hatching multiple times depending on how dark you want the surface. So here I would start with a very almost solid area of cross hatching. This is just one form of mark making. So I would gradually go up the scale, maybe mid-value. My hatching would be lighter and not so much hatching. And then way up next to white, it would be barely there. So imagine the scale going from dark to light with your cross hatching.